Hey everyone, welcome to or welcome back to the Badass Confidence Coach podcast. This is your host, Anna Marceline, with her husband, life partner, and I think at this point, co-podcaster, Tim.
I like how you went third person there. That was interesting.
I've never done that before. Something a little different this time, huh?
I like it.
Yeah.
I like it. So wait, before we get rolling today, all right. So happy birthday week to you.
Oh, thank you.
Right. So we got that.
Thank you.
You have to let us all know how it feels to finally get into your 40s.
Talk about that. Yeah, you're as young as you feel. And
right.
I don't feel like.
But 40s, like.
Yeah, I don't feel like I'm in my 40s.
Yeah. So
I feel like I'm in my 20s still.
Let's talk about that. And then second, sad, right? Like your football team played this weekend. That was nice. But they got
the Washington, they say Commanders, we still say Redskins. Sorry, I know it's politically incorrect, but we do.
Yeah.
And everybody, when I was home this weekend in DC, most people say Redskins.
Yeah.
So,
well, as
the
they
Skins.
Should. Yeah.
Well, we're used to it. You know, we're just used to it. So,
yeah. They had a good run, though.
It's amazing. Jaden Daniels is a true talent. He's a phenom, once in a lifetime kind of player. And 33 years we've been waiting for this. We got to the NFC Championship, and we will just wait now to see what happens in the future. So, yeah, the Eagles totally pounced on them on Sunday, but that's okay.
It's all good.
Hopeful.
Yeah.
Hopeful.
Yeah.
That's good.
Cool.
Yeah. All right. So let's move on into today's topic, which is going to be a little bit of a continuation of what we've been talking about here on the podcast in the past several weeks. And what we're talking about. What are some of the reasons that family members go low contact or no contact with, and I'm specifically going to talk in this episode about adult children with their parents. Why does this happen? And you're going to hear some resonations of episodes about how to deal with emotionally immature people, which we just did, how to have difficult conversations. We just did that one as well. And this is a continuation because this is such a big issue. And it's really gone viral on social media. And as somebody who is from a large family, I know what it's like to, be in dysfunction. As I say, as a therapist and a life coach, there's not one family out there, not one that doesn't have some sort of dysfunction. And as a therapist, and someone who has done countless family therapy sessions and couples therapy sessions over the years, I don't do them anymore, but I've got, 30 years of experience with families. There are all kinds of reasons why this happens. So, but what is different today with, I think, more the millennials and the Gen Zers is they are less tolerant and they tend to go low contact or no contact. It's more unusual for the Gen Xers and, of course, the baby boomers to do this. So we're going to talk a little bit, too, about different ways of viewing relationships in the world. The millennials are so much more therapy savvy and mental health savvy, and the Gen Zers. And they're willing to talk more about boundaries and what they're willing to do when it comes to boundaries that us Gen Xers and millennials, we wouldn't do this so much. Yeah. And that's where I'm seeing the rub. And I did a post on this in early December, and wow, did I get pushback. This was on TikTok. I mean, the comments, there's still people commenting, debating and arguing on this one post in my comment feed about whether it be the Gen Xers whose adult children don't have anything to do with them or have gone low contact with them. Sometimes I've got the younger generation and they're talking about why they've done that. And they've been debating back and forth. And there's a lot of pain. That's what's underneath this. There's just a lot of pain there, what people are experiencing. Yeah. And they're sounding off on social media.
Is the debate, does it revolve around if you should or why you should do this, choose to do this? Both. But is there one stronger than the other?
The debate on my TikTok is those who have done it.
Okay.
And why they have done it. And what is interesting to me, what has been resounding to me in the comments is, number one, there's pain. Number two, there's a lack of listening. Now, this is social media, so I always take it with a grain of salt. I mean, these people don't know each other. And because they don't know each other, they're more free to let those fingers fly on their phones and go off on each other.
Yeah, sure.
Right?
Yeah.
So we all have to keep that in mind when we see people. We talk about the keyboard warriors who have no filter, and it's something you would never say to somebody to their face or someone in your real life, but on the internet or on, social media, you'll have no filter and you'll sound off and and just go off on anyone because you think, well, I don't know them. I'm never going to meet them.
Right.
And you're seeing this,
Yeah.
right?
And I think that's part of this too. I mean, that's a factor in this conversation,
It
right?
is a
Because
factor.
you're
Yeah.
bringing generations together that have very different upbringings in terms of time,
And
right?
you're bringing so you're bringing Gen Xers and we all have had different experiences with our families of origin.
Yeah.
So take a whole generation of people, us, we're the Gen Xers, and my experience growing up is not yours. Yours is not Susie's. Yours is not Tommy's. Yours is not Joe's. Yours is not Veronica's. Yours is not Jessica's. We've all had different experiences in our families of origin and what we grew up with.
Yeah.
So that's why when you read these comments, I don't know. Somebody could be sounding really harsh and nasty, but maybe they were physically abused by a parent for most of their childhood.
Yeah.
We have no idea.
Because that was more of a thing, arguably, in the 60s, in the 70s, right? Which is what we're talking about.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's interesting. So that's nuance. So there you go. So like we were hit. I was hit. We got the belt when I was growing up.
Yeah.
A lot of people did. See, I don't think you did, but we did. We all got the belt. If you did something really bad.
Yeah.
And I don't think any of us, well, I won't speak for my 7 siblings. If you've been listening to me in the podcast, there's something we call, trauma, big T trauma, and there's little T traumas. Nobody is getting through this world, getting through this life experience without having many little T traumas in their lives. I don't know for my siblings. I'll speak for myself. Like I just said, I don't have big T trauma around getting spanked. I hated the belt, and it happened rarely. But like I got spanked with a wooden spoon by my mom. She was annoyed with us. She was just, at her limit, but I don't have trauma around that.
Yeah.
It hurt.
Yeah.
I didn't like it. And I put my hand down and she'd hit my hand before she hit in the back of my leg or my butt.
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember that. Like you'd be like, ow, no, I'm sorry. And you put your hand down.
Right.
And she'd smack your hand with that wooden spoon. That hurt.
Yeah.
But I don't have trauma around that. But you take somebody else who I could be sitting here with, who'd say, no, and that has totally affected me.
Totally. Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
So that's why when you're on TikTok or Instagram, or I don't know where it would be, YouTube, but people making comments, you have no idea somebody else's experience.
Yeah. And if you take, so that you're talking about those types of things happened to a Gen Xer or a baby boomer, those are their experiences. And then you compare that in sharp contrast to the experience of potentially a millennial or a Gen Zer. And just in the context of this conversation, like we're talking about discipline, those are very different things. And then you add on top of all of that life experiences like that we had back in the 60s, 70s, 80s versus what's going on today, just in terms of technology, the difference is, right?
We were outside.
Yeah.
And we were miles away from home.
But that influences what goes on in terms of your wiring big time, right? So now you're trying to blend all of that together.
Right.
Good luck with that.
Yeah. So it's a challenge. And I think the theme, and I believe I said this in my 10-minute post on TikTok, the theme is love. Underneath all of this is love, because why is it that some individuals, millennials and Gen Zers, or people in their maybe 20s, 30s, early 40s, have good relationships with their mom and dad, and maybe they suck it up, and maybe they haven't gone low contact or no contact. They still see them, but they do have some trauma from their childhood, or their mom is still acting like a jerk. Why do they still have relationships with them? Because she probably doesn't act like a jerk all the time, or he doesn't, act, dad or father-in-law doesn't act this way often. Yeah, he does do it. He occasionally will make a comment. I'm trying to think of like examples, like rarely he'll drink too much at Christmas. And so what we do is we hightail it out of there once we see that father-in-law or dad's like on his 3rd scotch on the rocks. Okay, time to go. We're leaving, because the mood starts to turn. But before that, he's pretty fine. He's nice. He's jovial. He's asking, we're talking, shooting the breeze, watching a game or something. We're outside the yard, whatever we're doing.
Yeah.
But then once that next drink comes, it's time for us to gather up the kids or gather up ourselves and leave.
Yeah.
Versus that's maybe what you and I would do, or maybe what a millennial would do. But why is it that another person would be like, this is just too much for you. I'm not going to tolerate this. We're not going anymore because we don't want to be around it at all.
Right.
So, but we can't judge that because we have no idea what that person's experience is.
Yeah.
It really does come back to, I think it's love. I do. I think that how can we, in a loving way, take care of ourselves and love those around us. And I don't mean to be Pollyanna about it. Don't mean I have to speak in this episode in generalities, because if you're working with me one-on-one, I may be telling you something very different. Well, actually, I am going to be talking with you about something very different because it's your story.
Sure.
It's your narrative.
The specifics will be super.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, just as a reminder to all of you, if you're looking for a therapist and you're in the state of Illinois, reach out to me. If you want coaching around this, life coaching, I can coach you anywhere you are in the world. So hello@annamarcolene.com, reach out to me. Let's get on a call together and see if I'd be a good fit for you, because I'm going to work with you specifically on your scenario, your history, and what's going on in your present day life with your parents or with your adult children.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Have you?
There's nothing we can't talk about in your own therapy or coaching sessions. It's
Oh,
all on the
totally.
table. We talk about it all.
We do that now here in this house.
Yeah, we do.
Right?
Yeah.
So let me ask you a question. So have you actually spoke to an actual human that has done this? Not like seen it
Done
on
what?
like either gone no contact or low contact? Or is it more that it's just a
Yes.
social media conversation?
No. This is the thing.
But you've talked to somebody that's done
Yes.
this. Okay.
For years now.
For years you've talked to them.
See, I just don't see. This is good, everybody who is watching and listening. We don't talk about my clinical cases.
No, you
I don't
don't.
talk about my cases.
Yeah.
There's nothing about this. That's confidentiality, my ethics. I don't. You don't know anything
As
about
it should
right,
be.
as it
Yeah,
should-
yeah.
right.
But
No,
like,
yes, of course.
I can say I have never had a conversation with somebody that's done this. So, and I would love to see or hear a little bit more about how that choice came about inside of you, and like how you did it and why you did it. Like, I would love to hear a little bit more about that and have somebody drill down a little bit more on that story. Why they chose to
Okay,
go that way.
Okay, so for those people who've gone no contact, either with their adult children or, because I have seen it the other way too, where I've seen the parents who go low contact or no contact with their adult children.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's not just, 20 somethings, more the 30s and the early 40s that are doing this
Yeah.
with their adult parents. It's also the parents who have gone low contact. They don't want to, but they have had to, sometimes to preserve their own mental health. I've seen it where there is a mental health issue that's not being treated. So we can get into it a little bit right now. I have these are the notes that I took. So what are some of the reasons why we go low contact or no contact with one another? So remember, this is not always the grandparents or the parents, the older generation. Sometimes it's the older generation that has had to go low contact or no contact with their adult children. It's more unusual, and I've seen it happen.
Interesting.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So number one, it's going to be toxic communication patterns. So there's just this persistent criticizing, belittling, or an invalidation that you're trying to get from a family member, and it's not coming. And remember, everyone, this is not one time. This is not 2024. This is, for most people, almost a lifetime of this, of memories and remembrances of this. Okay. So we're looking at patterns. These are patterns. All right. There's this chronic negativity or this conflict that just creates emotional distress in you. It's chronic negativity.
Yeah.
Okay. Gaslighting. We've talked about that on the podcast. Feeling gaslit. You're being gaslit or manipulated. It undermines. And what does that do? It undermines trust.
Yeah.
All right. So,
And if this stuff happens again and again, I guess at some point,
and if this is happening to any of you over and over and over again, I hope you're seeing someone. I hope you're talking to somebody about this.
yeah,
You start by talking with friends, people who support you. You're probably going to need to see a therapist about this. All right. Because you're going to this is past work. You got to do the past. As coaches, as a clinical life coach, someone who's a licensed mental health therapist, I can coach you on this, but we're not going to spend a lot of time here. I have had coaching clients who, anything you want to talk about, we're going to talk about. And what makes me different, what sets me apart from everybody else in the life coaching space is that I'm a licensed mental health person, and I'm trained, and it's my expertise. I can talk to you and guide you in the right ways. However, we are not going to spend session after session after session after session on it. And if a client has done that, I've sent them to a therapist, because that's not what coaching does. All right. Because that often tells me we're going into trauma work. You need to see a therapist. Okay.
And you can speak to the other side of that coin too, because you do that also.
And I'm a therapist and I do that with
Yeah.
clients.
So
So if you're if you're a therapy client of mine, sure.
yeah.
We need to spend time unpacking some of these deep-seated issues, unresolved past issues,
Yeah.
going down, remembering these memories and your traumas. Absolutely.
Did it take a while for you to get comfortable putting two different hats on? Because like you're talking about
In the very beginning.
two different
Yeah.
approaches, right?
Yeah.
And in one seat, you're approaching it from one way, and then all of a sudden, it's like you have a different client, and it's like, okay, flip the hat, flip the seat, and now I'm approaching it a completely different way with
It's
this
case by
person.
case basis. In the very beginning, a little bit in the beginning, but
Yeah,
has happened over the years is people know what they want when they come to me. People pretty much are sure that, I want coaching with her. I want her to coach me. And what I love now is that people are listening to me on the podcast and from social media is they know exactly how I work. And they, like I said, they come to me because a licensed mental health professional,
yeah,
but they want coaching. And they say, I love that you know about mood disorders. I love that you understand what it's like to be clinically depressed because I have dealt with that and I'm dealing with that now, but I'm like on meds and I'm really work out and I really am doing all the things that my former therapist and maybe my psychiatrist is helping me with. And I love that you know all that, but I don't really want to do that with you because it's resolved. It's lying dormant right now.
yeah. It's not the current
It's not the current issue.
issue,
Right. But they love that I know it.
Yeah,
Because I can pull from it. It's a specialized insight and knowledge that us therapists have.
yeah.
So, but they don't want that. So they love that. And then people who come to me for therapy, they want therapy and I know what it is and they know what it is. And there's really no question there. It can be more of a question a little bit with coaching. I got a client even last week who we were talking and we were talking about our goals, but then from the conversation about these new goals that she had set for herself, we went into something about relationships in the family, the relationships that have gone, I say a little dry. It's low contact. It's not no contact. They just don't have much of a connection with each other as the years have gone by and as older family members have passed on. And this is something that I do see is when adult parents die, sometimes that can affect the threads that run through family connections. So now that mom has passed on, dad has passed on, you live 2 states away. Well, we're not seeing each other at Thanksgiving because mom and dad are gone. So now family plans change, where you go for the holidays change.
Makes
That's
sense.
really common.
Yeah.
And so we were talking about that. And then she started to go into a little bit about, why that's happened. And she goes, this is something I should probably talk to my therapist about. This is more mental health. I said, no, we could talk about that. I never want a coaching client to think they can't talk about something. No, we could talk about that. Absolutely. I need to understand that because we were talking about goals of wanting to better a relationship with a family member. Absolutely. I can coach you on that. And I do it all the time.
Right.
So tell me the history. Let me understand where you're coming from and what this is about. And then we'll get some goals in place about maybe a conversation that you're going to have. Absolutely. That's appropriate for coaching.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
It's important to me that the supplements I take are of the highest quality. And that's why for 5 years, I've been drinking AG1. Unlike many supplement brands, AG1 conducts relentless testing to set the standard for purity and potency. I know I can trust what's in every scoop of AG1 because it's tested for 950 contaminants and banned substances, while the industry standard typically only tests for 10. Taking care of my health shouldn't be complicated, and AG1 simplifies this by covering my nutritional basis and setting myself up for success in just 60 seconds. AG1's ingredients are heavily researched for efficacy and quality, and I love that every scoop also includes prebiotics, probiotics, and digestive enzymes for gut support. So if you want to replace your multivitamin and more, start with AG1. Try AG1 and get a free 1-year supply of vitamin D3 plus K2 and 5 free AG1 travel packs with your first subscription at drinkag1.com/Anna. That's drinkag1.com/Anna. Check it out. You will not regret it. So What are some of the reasons toxic communication patterns in families? And there's a history there. Remember, it's toxic. Okay. Toxic. Lack of boundaries. We've talked about that before. They're just, disrespecting somebody's personal space, choices, or boundaries. And I see it around, well, boundaries, and I see it around choices where maybe you really, really, really just need to step away because you're really struggling with somebody's maybe life choices. All right. You have to step away, but you got to let them live their lives too. All right. So, all of the boundaries issue is maybe if you feel like you're in a enmeshed relationship with somebody where, your own individual autonomy is disregarded. So we call those enmeshed relationships. That's family systems theory, sort of 101. So there's enmeshed and there's disengaged. Disengaged is, well, it's kind of the low contact. Or a family that's disengaged is where the concentric circles don't overlap at all. So I don't want to do a master class on family therapy 101, but because I'll bore you all with it. But it's where you are in your own circle, like I'm in my circle, Tim, and you're in your circle, and we are married. We live in the same house together, but our circles don't overlap at all. You and I are like two ships passing in the night. We're living our lives, raising our kids, and maybe we eat together, but we don't have any emotional intimacy. We don't have psychological intimacy. We don't really talk anymore. We just talk about the daily goings on of how we're running our home and the routines. And I won't be in tonight. I have a meeting after work. Did you feed the dogs? That's that's a disengaged marital couple. And enmeshed is where I rely on you for my emotional life. You rely on me. You take care of me. I seem to struggle with my own autonomy and independence. You have a lot of opinions about my life and my friendships, and maybe you have a lot of opinions about my colleagues, and I rely on you for your opinions. And I'm struggling with making decisions around relationships with my colleagues because I need your input. I'm struggling with that autonomy. That's more of an enmeshed relationship, an enmeshed marriage.
Yeah.
So
That
that's a lack of boundaries.
Yeah. That first scenario sounds, you're almost like coworkers. It's like a manager and assistant manager.
that's
Like you're managing,
disengaged.
you're
Right.
managing life
Right.
together.
Right.
And that's really
Right.
where it stops.
Enmeshment, I see a lot of enmeshment with parents, mostly mothers with their children at every age. It can get really dysfunctional. Somebody who used to say to me all the time, I'm obsessed with my daughter. I'm obsessed with my daughter. That's an enmeshed relationship. And I'm like, yeah, that's not. And she would laugh about it. I'm like, yeah, that's not such a great thing to be, air quote, obsessed with your preteen daughter. And this was not a client. This is a friend. When we're friends, my personal friends in my life, I stay quiet. I'm your friend. You're not.
It's a good choice.
Sometimes I will give my input and I will ask them, do you want feedback or do you want my opinion? Most times I'm not giving my opinion. I just let them be because they're not asking for my opinion.
Yeah.
They don't want to know what I think. So
Yeah.
I'm not giving it.
Right.
Because I want to just have dinner and laugh.
Stay out
I don't
of
want
it.
to be your therapist
Right.
or your life coach. Okay, so lack of boundaries. Why we go low contact is just an overbearing or controlling people in our lives. So that really can create resentment. You see this around sometimes a mother-in-law. You see this with a father-in-law. You just see it with really more the grandparents, the adult parents about this is how I want it to go. And you all know, because I talked about it here a few weeks ago about my relationship with Marissa about Christmas time. And I was like, no, you need to come here because I think I did. I talked about this on that post I did on TikTok about, I want you to come here. Like, this is how we do it at Christmas. And I did that. I was talking at her, telling her how it was going to go down for the holidays. And she's like, I don't think so, Mom. We got a huge fight about it. Well, that was me. Well, I wasn't lacking boundaries. I was just going by an old system that you and I had created raising our children. And now they're in their 20s. The system is changing. And that's what I think a lot of people, a lot of the generation, the Gen X and the baby boomers don't realize. Your kids are getting older. It's changing. They are now creating their own routines and their own holidays, even if they're not even like with somebody. Maybe they don't want to sleep over on Christmas Eve. Maybe they want to come Christmas afternoon. And like, you're like, no. This is how it's always been. I don't care that you're 30. This is how it's always been. You need to come. This is what we do. And they're like, no, I'm going to church and downtown or I'm doing something different for Christmas Eve. And I'm sorry you want me there for the dinner. We've done it, but I'm 30 years old now. I told you all that. I was mad at I tell you also another with my daughter who's like, she said to me, when was it? Just recently. She said to me, Mom, I'm 30 years old. I'm not 10 anymore. So there you go, everybody. Like I put myself out there too.
Right.
I'm showing total vulnerability to all of you. I mean, and I had to like have a come to Jesus meeting with myself about like, okay, I don't like this and times are changing. And you know what I say to myself? If you, Anna, you want to have a relationship with these kids, you better change. I better change because they are growing up, they're evolving. They now have new boyfriends and girlfriends, and we're moving into the era of now life. They're developing and moving into marriages and life partners. I better change and
Yeah.
I better learn to go with it
Yeah.
because if I don't and you don't, we're not going to see them.
Right.
They're not going to come around,
Right.
right? You know this, Tim.
100%. 100%.
They're going to go low, or they will go. They may not go no contact, but they'll go low contact. And what I worry about is that they're never going to want to be here because then they'll find their in-law parents are just so much more fun and so much more laid back than, oh, my mom, she's like so neurotic. And she's just like, this is what time you have to be here. This is what's going to happen. And this is what happens.
Yeah.
Then they always want to be at the other
It's too much
parent's
for
house.
them to manage it, right? They're like,
Yeah.
I'd rather not have to worry about managing it. And the path of least resistance is not here.
And I will,
Right?
I will admit,
Yeah.
I'll say this. This is 25 to 30 years ago when I was in my first marriage, and my mother changed. And I think looking back now, I think she was going through some changes in her life. I'm not sure if it was menopause, postmenopause, or if she was at that time dealing with a depression that went undiagnosed, but her personality changed from the mom and the person I remember. This is probably more 25 years ago because she was really wonderful when the first two kids were born. But later, when my son was born and there were many more grandchildren around, she changed towards me and how I perceived her. So I lived in Chicago and they lived in the DC, the DMV area in Maryland. And she was not as welcoming when I came home for the holidays with my family. And she was in a bad mood quite a bit. She would be irritable towards me and I didn't feel welcome. And it just was, and there was nothing spoken between us. She just was acting a certain way. She'd make comments about, oh, you always want to go running all the time. And it annoyed her. I remember this very well. It annoyed her that my ex-husband, now my husband at the time, had no problem. He'd watch the kids, the little kids, when I'd go for a run because that was when I just got into running. So I was going to, if I was home for a week, I'd run like 4 days a week, 5 days a week. And it bothered her because she didn't value exercise. They're the silent generation. Exercise was not a thing then, and she didn't value exercise, and she was very much a traditional homemaker. And she thought it was, air quotes, selfish that I'd go running. And here my husband says, I don't really care. Go for a run. What do I care? You can for 30, 45 minutes. I can take care of that. She had words with me about that. So here's what happened. I just sucked it up because of our generation, Gen X, you didn't talk back. I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I didn't want to do that. I was hurt. I didn't understand why she's being that way. And I just thought, wow, she just thinks I'm this really selfish, self-centered person, daughter. Because I also wasn't like her. I think it made her mad that I wasn't doing it exactly as she did it when she was a young mother.
Right.
And she had a hard time with Anna's her own independent, autonomous person. All that to say, I mean, I could do a whole episode on that alone. All that to say, what happened. So here's how I dealt with it. I loved my ex-husband's family, and they're wonderful people, and they were just always a joy to be around. My relationship with them grew over the years. I wasn't as close to them in the beginning, but my mother-in-law was wonderful to my grandchildren, to her grandchildren. She just was the grandma who was there to babysit the weekend so we could go away. She was just so much fun, and she became a good friend of mine, which was unusual. And what happened was I wanted to spend time with them because there was joy and there was happiness and there was laughter. And she loved being around all of us. She would never make a comment. She's like, sure, go for a run. I got them for, whatever. What do I care? I just want to be with my grandchildren. And what do? You start to make decisions at Thanksgiving and at Christmas and at summer vacations. You're like, where do I want to go? Do I want to go to the place where my mother tells me I'm selfish for going for a 30-minute run? Or do you want to also drive an hour and a half away versus a 2-hour flight? Do you want to drive an hour and a half away to my in-laws who are just these happy people who express joy when you walk in the front door?
Yeah.
That's where you're going to go. It's human nature. And that's what started to happen. So I never had words with my mother in those years. We stopped going as much because my husband at the time, I would kind of complain to him. I would get upset with him and he saw it too. And he didn't understand why that was happening. So we're like, all right, what's the natural thing? We're going to go. That's how it often happens. So there's no words that take place because I think as the adult child at that time, me in my late 20s, also Gen X, we didn't confront, we didn't yell at our parents. We just sort of backed away from them. The millennials today, they're having words with their parents. And unless you are psychologically savvy or you're interested in therapy or personal development of yourself, you've been coached, you're just are interested in your own personal development and growth, you're going to have a hard time with your millennial or your Gen Z kid talking to you. And so that's why we're doing this episode for all of you to learn to be able to listen when criticisms come your way. Don't try not to get your back up. Try not to get defensive. Listen. There's a reason why they're telling you this. Listen to them. And if you need help, seek consultation. Get help with someone around this, okay? But they obviously care enough to talk to you. They didn't care about you at all. They didn't love you. They didn't care at all about a relationship. They wouldn't even tell you.
Right.
They would ghost you. They would ghost you.
Super true.
Ghosting is a big thing today. We're ghosting friends, ghosting potential boyfriends, girlfriends, people you're on a third, fourth date with. You just ghost them. It's painful. It's painful for these people because I talk to them all the time about being ghosted. And that's what they're going to do to you. They're going to ghost you. They care to talk to you. If you and your adult child is doing something that's really hard, and well, I see this more around addiction, and that is also nuanced. That's case by case, because if you're dealing with a 30-year-old who has a terrible alcoholism, it has a disease, is not getting help as adults, as the parents, like 50, 60-year-old, 7-year-old, sometimes you do have to back away. It's a tough love. That's a tough love thing. That's its own conversation as well. But remember, so sometimes we have to ghost people. Sometimes we have to back people out of our lives. You got to love them from a distance. But if they're taking the time to talk to you, please listen. Try not to get defensive.
That's a tough ask, right?
It's a tough
It's
ask.
a tough
I
ask.
understand it's a tough ask.
Yeah.
I understand it's a tough ask. And please take the time to listen. Is there anywhere in there? Is there any room for me to grow? Is there anywhere that maybe I can change? I'm going to say this. There's very few absolutes in life. Absolutes is that you always, this always, using the word always or never, you never. Okay. Those are absolute statements. We don't like those statements. All right. In the mental health and the coaching space.
Well, because most of the time they're not true.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
That's why you don't like them.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so
all right. So hold on.
We gotta move on.
We do, but let me ask this question. So you're a Gen Xer, right? So you have been on both sides of this conversation.
Yeah, I have been.
So is it, and maybe this is a whole nother episode, but the generation that came before our generation, so the boomers and whoever the heck
silent generation.
was the silent before the boomers.
Yeah.
So was there some version of all of this going on back in the 30s, 40s?
No, I don't think
ever. None of it.
Ask your mother.
Well, that's
Ask
what
your
I would
mom.
like to hear.
And I've asked my mother.
Yeah.
My mother doesn't talk. My mother's going to be 89.
Yeah.
My mother doesn't talk about, and my father never spoke about his parents. It's weird. I mean, so my father passed in 2020. He was 88. He was like a week shy of his 89th birthday. He didn't talk about they didn't talk about these issues. They didn't talk about mental health. They didn't talk about family relationships. My parents didn't really talk about the relationship. My father never spoke about his relationship with his mother and his father. And I know my siblings in the past few years, we've thought it odd because we all realized, Dad never talked about his dad. And he died in 61. I think 61. I think my oldest brother was born. So none of us knew him. So he just didn't talk about him. And we had a relationship with my grandmother, but she'd had a stroke, my Nona, and she couldn't speak. So he didn't really talk about his relationship with his mother either. It's interesting. I went back to Italy last year, and my aunt, she spoke about my grandmother and my dad's relationship with my grandmother. She told me more last year about my father and his mother's relationship than I ever knew. It's interesting. She was more willing to talk about the past and relationships and and it's Italian. So like who didn't like who and who was lazy and who was a hard worker. It was such an insightful conversation. So if anybody ever has an opportunity to talk to the generation, because she's in her 80s, she will pass. And I'm so thankful. I mean, she was telling me things. I was like in her house in Northern Italy. And I'm like tears streaming down my face. I'm like, I've never heard this, because all of these great aunts and great uncles and my great grandparents, they never came. They were in Italy. I didn't know anything about them. She remembers them when she was a child. And it was truly, everyone, if you have an opportunity to do this, it was as if the pictures of these people, these black and white photos just came alive in my mind. They became real people with personalities and quirks and likes and dislikes. I know I was with my son Grafton and I was like, tears streaming down my face. And they're just all my cousins and Grafton and all just looking at me. It hit me. So they didn't talk so much. I mean, my mother did talk a little bit about her father. She did talk a little bit about resentments with my grandfather because he was an alcoholic and how disruptive and how hard that was. And she was one of 9 kids and how hard that was having a father as an alcoholic and what that did to the entire family system. She did talk about that. She talked about having anger and resentments towards him. I remember after he died, I was 10 years old. I remember I didn't go to the funeral because I was too young and they only brought like the first 4 or 5 kids and my 2 younger sisters and I stayed home. And I do remember her coming home and we were so dependent on her. She was, the emotional leader in the family and she'd go up in her bedroom and cry and shut the door. Well, I didn't know what she was doing, but I had a sense at 10 years old that she was crying and we'd ask my dad, where's mom? Where's mom? And he would say, she needs to be alone. Leave her alone. Don't go up there. Cause we'd go up and knock on the door. Mom, what are you doing? Where are you? Why don't you down in the kitchen? I do remember that happened a few times where she would cry. But what she told us later, I think I was in high school, she said I had resentments and anger toward my father. So I would cry because I didn't know what to do with my anger. And then she was able to, through her own spiritual work, forgive him for issues that she had with him. She never spoke about her mother in any way other than positive. Never. I do remember my grandmother when I was in high school. So she died when I was 18. I must have been 15 or 16. I do remember talking to her and her saying to me, we didn't talk about issues. She said to me, we push them under the rug.
Yeah.
That's what we do. I remember her saying that to me because I must have been talking to her about something about what it's like today. She said, no, we push issues, thoughts and feelings of family issues under the rug. And she said to me, I would never want to be a teenager today. But that she was talking about the difficulty of being a teenager. And that time it was in the 80s.
Right.
Can you imagine what she would think or they would think about us in the 2020s? So that was it.
They
I mean,
wouldn't.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, and my parents were not comfortable with us talking about any issues we had with them. And I tried to talk to my father. He literally got up and walked out of the room. He just walked away with my mom and dad. My mother sat and listened. My mother did. And that was it. I did it twice. I remember when I confronted them about something when I was young that I thought was wrong. And my mother listened and acknowledged me and validated me. That was very healing. My father just left. So I know other siblings in the family have talked about my father's, he wouldn't acknowledge it, but kind of like a roundabout way acknowledge by saying something about being a good father. Was I a good father? I think in his later years, wondering about that and being tearful. One of my siblings told me, and it was in his way, I think, a way of acknowledging, but not really acknowledging, but knowing that I think we felt acknowledged that he did hear us when we talked about these things. Now we're in our 20s and 30s, but that's it.
Yeah.
What about you? I just talked to
Well,
Tom a
but
bunch.
so the reason I asked that question, right, is because it's not because there were no issues back in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. Like it's not like life was perfect, right?
Right.
The issues were there. People just chose not to speak of them.
They were there.
Right?
They were there. And I know from your side of the family, and I won't pull now names.
Yeah.
I know from talking to the generation of your parents' generation, I know there were issues and I know they never talked about them. They never talked to their parents and their family members. They just pushed it under the rug or they prayed it away.
Yeah.
Pray it away. Just say your prayers and forgive and forget. Be Christ-like and forgive. But they never talked about it. And what I saw, our generation sees, is it went underground. So we talked about you don't want things to go underground. It went underground and it came out in another way. So then you get this big fight. They'd be arguing and kind of bitching at each other in the kitchen. And then they just act like, forget about it. And they would just go on and serve dinner and or go out and have like months would go by and they'd have fine family events and be together until the next time somebody said something or did something, a lot of passive aggressiveness. And then they'd have an argument and they'd be like, say kind of mean, snarky things to one another. and then that would be it, and then they'd go on.
Yeah.
But what happened was, I saw my experience. Now, I've never had a direct conversation with them, except one time I understood the snarkiness and the meanness that would come out on your side of the family, because no one talks. No one talks about thoughts. No one talks about feelings. I think a lot of them actually think therapy is kind of ridiculous, even though it's 2025 now. I don't think they're therapy savvy people. I don't think they're psychologically minded people. I think that it's all about your Christian faith, and that's it. Still, I mean, that's really old school, but there are a lot of communities and a lot of people who still feel this way.
Yeah.
And I think that it's just like, pray it away, pray it away. Well, it doesn't go away. And my feeling is that that's why God gave us to each other, to help each other out here.
Right.
So I may have a little bit more knowledge and insight than you. to help you
So
out with it.
so let's circle this wagon back around.
Yep.
So there must have been, though, some type of, in somebody's mind back in the day, I'm talking about like the baby boomers, there must have been some like lower contact movement inside of them, right? To distance themselves. No, like some version of what's going on in 2024, 2025.
They must have, but they didn't talk about it. Tim, think about it. Think about your parents.
Well, I'm not saying they had to talk about it, but did they actually do it? Like did some version of what's going on today in a really tiny little fashion?
Yeah, probably.
Right? Like,
But I think it came out as in a passive aggressive way.
Okay.
I think it must have.
Yeah.
You know, I mean,
because what I'm trying to do is connect the dots. Like, everybody that's listening to this podcast, you got 20 somethings, 30s, 40s, of all ages listening to this podcast.
right.
So people are doing or considering doing different versions of what we're talking about today, but their backgrounds are so vastly different, right? Like, you grew up in the 70s. You grew up in this, right? You were born in the 60s. You grew up in the 70s. And it's like, you would never even think about doing something that's happening in 2025. You just can't wrap your head around, like, well, I would never actually do that.
Right.
But like a baby boomer can't even understand what you're talking about right now.
I understand.
Right? Like,
yeah. Because
you know what I'm saying?
they're well, not all baby boomers. Some baby boomers
Not
are
all.
amazingly psychologically
Yes,
savvy.
of course.
The baby boomers are the people who taught me in the field of psychology. Those are my teachers. Those are my mentors. Those are the professors in academia and the continuing education. Those are the most insightful, wise people. The baby boomers who have taught me that I still today look up to. Some have passed on. Many are still alive, but they to me are the pinnacle of knowledge. So yeah, there are quite a few. But I think for most of North America, I'm talking about Americans. I think Europeans are different. I think if you were born and raised in any of the African countries, if you're from the Middle East or you're from Asia, it's very different. Those cultures are very, very different. I mean, their cultures I think many cultures, you did not talk. You sucked it up. You may not have liked your overbearing mother or your overbearing mother-in-law, but you dealt with it.
Yeah.
You just dealt with it because you did not speak, because it was disrespect. And honor and disrespect is number one.
Yeah.
Think about Asian cultures. You did not.
And it's still in some cultures happening right now.
Yes, it is happening
right? So
now.
that's the interesting twist to this whole thing.
And that's what's different about, I think, North America, Americans and Canadians.
Yeah.
Maybe you see it a little bit in Latin America, but I have to tell you, I even think like the people I know, Mexicans who live in Mexico and had experiences, more upper middle class affluent Mexicans who love their country, who are not coming here. You honor your mother and your father. And that means you don't talk back to them. And they can be a certain way, but you don't disrespect them. And so there's none of the mental health stuff. There's none of this having words with my mother and saying, I don't like the way that it's very much this country, I think Canada.
Most of the time, that's correct.
So let's put in that caveat. We're going to have to end this episode. Let's put in the caveat that we're talking about North Americans here. Yeah. And if any of you are listening and you're from anywhere else in the world and you disagree with me, I would love to hear your feedback on this. I would love to hear how it is for you. What do you think about this episode? Do you agree or do you not disagree? And if you don't agree, let me know why, because I always want the feedback. I always want the input because I'm so interested in what it's like for people in other countries. And what do you do when you have a mother or a father or an in-law or in-law mother or father that is hard for you? Do you talk to them about it? Do you go to therapy? Do you have coaching around this? Do you suck it up and just keep it on the down low and just kind of just go over there for your family dinners or go over there and you never say a word, and you just count the time until you leave, and you just know that during that time, this is how it's going to be? I'd be curious to hear how it is for you in other parts of the world, not so
Yeah.
much the country, but the world.
Well, even in certain parts of the United States, I mean, it's not like
That's
this
just
is,
said, different cultures.
yeah, I mean, this isn't commonplace in every home in
In,
every
in,
state in the United States.
in Orthodox Jewish and more very conservative Catholic and evangelical, Pentecostal, Baptists, Mormons, the Quakers, there are many, many subcultures in this country where you don't do these things. Okay. So that I would love to hear from you.
That's an
All right.
interesting talk right
So,
there.
okay, we got to end because we just went way off track, but this is a good conversation. So, what are some of the reasons why people go low contact or no contact with each other, family members, toxic communication patterns, lack of boundaries? And we didn't get into it, but we'll go on because there's a lot more. We're going to talk about addiction, narcissistic behavior, favoritism. So, we have more to say here. So, this is part one. We'll do a part two on some of the reasons why we
I like
decide
that.
to go low contact or no contact. And I'm not going to go into the reasons for all of you because, well, I am talking about the reasons, but I'm not going to give you the answers because it's different for each and every one of you. All right. Remember for this podcast, I'm speaking in generalities. It always has to be generalities because I'm not your therapist. I'm not your life coach. This is a podcast and this is general insights. Okay. And I am taking it from my own clinical and professional experience. I'm also taking it from personal experience.
Very
But
true.
remember, if you want help with all this, reach out. Okay. And if you need a therapist and you're in another state other than Illinois, please don't hesitate to reach out. If this is something that's plaguing you, that's staying with you on the inside, get the help you need for this. All right. Because this is tough stuff. These are really big family issues. They can do a number on our mental health.
Big time.
Yeah. Okay. All right, everyone. So please subscribe, rate with 5 stars, review the podcast, 1 or 2 sentences. It makes all the difference in the world. And until next time, all right, mad love.